Move! Now! Commander Rovan Dask's voice cracked through the comms, a razor edge of urgency that cut through the silence of Earth's final moments. His hand slammed against the console, fingers tapping in frantic bursts as he watched the enemy fleet drop from orbit like an unstoppable storm. The cold metal of the command room's floor was underfoot, a grim reminder that their once vibrant world had been reduced to a shell of its former self. His breath came in shallow, controlled bursts, each inhale heavy with the smell of burnt circuits and the bitter sting of adrenaline. The familiar warmth of Earth, now a memory, lingered like the last traces of a vanishing dream. "Commander!" Major Dorian Mace's voice came through the comms, his tone taut but resolute. "What's the plan?" Dask's eyes flickered over the laser plasma displays, the screen casting a pale blue light on his furrowed face. His knuckles turned white around the edge of the console. The Zephyr had believed they had won. They believed humanity was nothing but a footnote. And yet, here they were, ready to rise from the ashes. "The plan," Dask muttered, "is not what they think. Get to the launch bays. We're not running from this fight. We're ending it." With a swift motion, he turned to the team gathered behind him. Dr. Silas Trevin, the engineer who had defied every expectation, and Admiral Oris Vexlar, who still carried the weight of Earth's shattered fleets on his broad shoulders. The team was a fractured collection of humanity's last warriors, but together they would be something far worse than prey. The hum of the low-gravity boots echoed in the silence, boots clanging against the metal, their steps a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat at the edge of death. Each motion was deliberate, the tension palpable as they moved toward their fate. Earth had been obliterated. Its cities lay in ruins, its once thriving population now scattered in pockets of resistance. But one thing the Zephyr didn't understand: they had underestimated humanity's refusal to lie down and die. "It's not over, Vexlar," Dask said with an edge of bitterness, his voice low, almost a growl. "We were never here for survival. We were here to make them wish they'd never landed." Vexlar's lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. "Then let's make them regret it." The echo of Dask's words lingered, heavy and prophetic, as they stepped through the narrow metallic hallways of the underground base, heading towards the launch bays where the last of humanity's fleet waited. The walls, once painted with the gleam of modernity, now held a dull, scarred patina, scars earned from the relentless bombardments that had shattered Earth's surface. The air tasted metallic, almost like blood, as if the very atmosphere had absorbed the violence it had witnessed. "We should have struck earlier," Trevin spoke up, his voice almost a whisper against the heavy silence that hung over them. He was always the one who questioned, always the skeptic. But right now, Dask needed his sharp mind, not his doubts. Dask shot a quick glance at the engineer. "You think we didn't try? Every piece of tech they threw at us just dug deeper. You saw what happened to Washington, to Moscow. They didn't leave us much of a choice. But now they'll see." Trevin didn't respond, but Dask could see the glint of resolve in his eyes. The scientist knew what had to be done. The EMP they'd reverse-engineered from the alien bombs, the very ones designed to wipe out Earth's last defenses, had turned the tide. They'd taken the weapons meant to annihilate humanity and turned them into a trap, a deadly trap. The laser plasma displays flickered in the war room, lighting up the faces of the remaining commanders, their expressions tight with suppressed anticipation. Their warships, disguised beneath layers of Earth's most resilient defense tech, were ready. These ships weren't just survivors. They were the ghosts of Earth's last hope, their hulls crafted from the debris of fallen cities and abandoned military outposts. Humanity's fleet had risen from the rubble, a vengeance incarnate. A low rumble shook the room, a deep vibration that rattled the walls as the Zephyr fleet fired the first volley. The explosion was deafening in the distance, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The planet's core, already destabilized by the bombardment, groaned like a dying beast struggling to hold on. "That's the last of their planetary bombardment," Dask muttered, his lips curling into a grim smile. He turned back to his team, steely resolve in his gaze. Now we show them what happens when you mess with humanity. We don't have time to waste, Commander, Vexlar growled, his hands curling into fists. Let's get to the fleets and show them they've poked a sleeping giant. We'll make them regret this. The tension in the room tightened, a cord pulled taut. They had no more time for strategy. The Zyphar had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. Dask wasn't about to waste a single second on regret. There would be time for that later, when the galaxy trembled at the power of Earth's rebirth. Another explosion, this time closer. The air inside the command room grew thick, every breath strained as they reached the launch bay. The flashing red lights cast long shadows against the walls, their harsh glow a warning of what was to come. The launch bay doors creaked open, revealing the silhouette of humanity's last line of defense. The ships, small compared to the massive Zyphar dreadnoughts, nevertheless glowed with purpose. Their weapons gleamed, ready to unleash the deadly EMP strike they had devised. Humanity had learned to adapt, and now the Zyphar would witness the consequences of their arrogance. "Engage," Dask commanded, his voice filled with the certainty of a man who knew the game was just beginning. The fleet roared to life, engines igniting with a crackling pulse that shot across the bay. They weren't just flying toward a fight. They were charging into the heart of an empire that had thought they could crush humanity under their boots. The Zyphar might have bombed Earth, but they had awakened something far more dangerous, a humanity willing to burn down the galaxy just to watch the stars burn. As Dask's hands gripped the controls, he couldn't help but smile. "Let them come," he said, his voice cool as steel, but his heart pounding with the anticipation of what was about to unfold. "Let them come. They'll be waiting for a massacre." The first blast of the EMP detonated in space, silent but deadly. The darkness of the Zyphar's fleet shattered as their warships, once impenetrable, suddenly went silent, their engines flickering out like candles snuffed by an unseen wind. Drifting wrecks, powerless and vulnerable, ready to be boarded. "Now we show them what happens when you think you've won," Dask whispered to himself, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The first victory had just begun. The stage was set. The Zyphar had bombed Earth. But humanity? Humanity had been waiting. The deafening silence of the launch bay was shattered by the sharp crackle of static, followed by Dask's low, commanding voice. "Initiate EMP strike." A tense pulse of energy surged through the ship's systems, then rippled outward, a silent blast that struck the Zyphar fleet with surgical accuracy. Dask watched as the first line of alien warships blinked out of existence, their once pristine hulls now dark, lifeless husks, helpless in the cold void of space. The sense of control, the undeniable power, filled his veins with adrenaline. He had not simply survived their assault, he had turned it into a weapon. Major Mace's voice cut through the tension, sharp and urgent. "Command, we've got a clear path to the next fleet. The Zyphar don't know what hit them." Dask's hand gripped the controls harder, his mind racing. "Keep the pressure on them, Major. We need to keep them guessing, keep them off balance. Their pride will be their downfall." His gaze locked onto the laser plasma displays, watching the unrelenting pulse of the EMP burst out into the dark expanse of space, a harbinger of the devastation humanity had set into motion. The screens flickered with a cascade of data, the once dominant Zyphar vessels now reduced to drifting wrecks. Their systems short-circuited, their engines stilled in a cruel twist of fate. Humanity wasn't just fighting, they were fighting back with the very tools meant to destroy them. Dr. Trevin moved behind him, his thin figure sharp against the low light of the command center. His fingers danced over a series of glowing panels, his eyes flickering as he ran diagnostics, analyzing the results. "The EMP blast, it's working, but we need to push further. Their second fleet is close behind." Dask's lips curled into a tight smile. "Let them come. They think we're broken. Let's show them how we've rebuilt." A low rumble vibrated through the hull of the ship, the thrusters firing, propelling them forward into the heart of the Zyphar armada. The shock of space seemed to hold its breath for a moment before the ship's violent acceleration sent a tremor through Dask's body. His gaze flicked across the heads-up displays again, eyes narrowing as he plotted the next move. The star systems outside the viewport were muted, distant, indifferent, silent witnesses to the chaos humanity had unleashed. "Rovan," Vexlar's gravelly voice interrupted, calm and collected as always. "We've got company. The second wave is moving in fast." Dask didn't flinch. "Let them," he muttered. "We're not here to hide. We're here to make sure they understand what happens when they underestimate us." Major Mesa's voice crackled back through the comms, edged with grim satisfaction. "We've got movement, sir. The dreadnoughts are breaking apart. No resistance, no shields. We've breached their hulls." The weight of the words hung in the air like smoke. The Zyphar's pride, once their greatest asset, was now their vulnerability. Dask could almost taste it, the burning bitterness of the alien shock. But this was just the beginning. The power of their fleet may have been stifled, but the true weight of humanity's response would only be revealed when their strategy unfolded completely. Dr. Trevin leaned over Dask's shoulder, a faint flicker of unease in his usually impassive demeanor. "Commander, we have to move faster. We've struck the first wave, but their reinforcements won't be as weak. We need to find their command ship. That's where the heart of their force lies." Dask paused, his hand hovering over the controls. There was no hesitation in his actions, only the sharpness of his focus. "We know where it is. It's coming up fast. We strike at their core, then we finish this." There was a strange sort of calm that settled over the room. It wasn't the peace of safety, nor was it the comforting warmth of false hope. It was the cold certainty of inevitability. Humanity had clawed its way out of the grave, and now they were in a position to shape the galaxy's fate. There was no second chance, no room for error, "You sure this is the right play, Commander?" Trevin asked, his voice carrying a thread of doubt despite the confidence in his hands. His eyes met Dask's, searching for something, reassurance maybe. Dask's gaze never wavered. "It's the only play, Silas." The cold, mechanical hum of the ship was the only sound now, but within that hum, a sudden charge of anticipation buzzed in the air. The Zyphar had thought their victory was sealed. They hadn't accounted for human ingenuity, for the sharpness of their minds and the tenacity of their will to survive. Suddenly, a loud pop rang through the ship, the sound sharp and metallic. The force of an explosion rocked their ship briefly, sending a tremor down the corridor. It was distant, but no less alarming. Vexlar's voice cut through the radio, filled with controlled urgency. "Commander, incoming, another wave. The First Fleet has reinforcements, but we're already in their line of fire." Dask's brow furrowed, the calmness cracking as he allowed a moment's frustration to surface. "They're relentless. They just won't back off." "No backing off," Trevin replied, leaning over the laser plasma displays. "They're regrouping, Commander, but they won't know what hit them." His voice was quiet, but the resolve behind it was solid. A deep breath filled Dask's lungs, and then he released it slowly, like a coil loosening, his fingers steady as they returned to the control panel. "Their mistake was thinking we're running out of tricks. All we need is a clear shot at their command vessel. Hit them in the heart." Mesa's voice came back, laced with a bit of dark humor. "Clear shot, huh? You're making it sound easy, Commander." "Easy's not the word I'd use, but it's what we'll do," Dask replied, eyes fixed on the incoming fleet. He gave Vexlar a brief glance. "Get the rest of the ships in position. We do this now, or they regroup and crush us." The sound of boots on metal echoed as the officers dispersed to their stations. Dask stood at the helm, the battle unfolding like a storm on the horizon. The Zyphar's arrogance had been their first mistake. Their second was thinking humanity's resolve could be shattered. As the ship cut through the darkness of space, the first glimmers of the alien command ship appeared on the radar. It was massive, far larger than any Earth ship, its sleek design shimmering ominously. But Dask only saw one thing: vulnerability. "Ready the second EMP charge," he barked, voice cold with finality. The crew moved with purpose, each task becoming part of the unfolding strategy. The seconds dragged into minutes, each one stretching with anticipation. Dask didn't speak again until the moment arrived. Now, we make them pay. With the press of a button, the second EMP burst through space, a silent wave of destruction that would cripple the heart of the Zyphar fleet. The command ship, once an imposing symbol of their power, now fell silent. Its mighty engines flickered, sputtered, and then stopped completely. Dask exhaled. This was just the beginning. They would fight until the last breath, until every empire knew the cost of underestimating humanity. "Prepare for boarding," he commanded, voice cold as the void itself. "Let's finish this." The command center was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of fingers on touchscreens and the occasional murmurs of the officers. Dask stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the laser plasma display. The once imposing Zyphar fleets were now crippled, their communications shattered, their ships adrift in the vacuum of space. The EMPs had done their job. The Zyphar were no longer the unstoppable juggernaut they once believed themselves to be. They had been brought to their knees by a single, well-executed strike. But this was only the beginning. "Commander, we've secured the first 2 dreadnoughts." Major Mace's voice cut through the stillness. His tone was pragmatic, almost clinical. There was no pride in his words, only a calm acknowledgement of the success. "Good," Dask replied, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something deeper, something darker. "Don't get comfortable. This isn't about taking their ships. It's about sending a message." Mace didn't need further explanation. He understood the stakes. Dask's fingers traced the edge of the console as he watched the heads-up display flicker, the glowing red dots signifying Zyphar ships scattered across the system, the once unified fleet now broken and scattered like a herd of wild animals with no leader to guide them. The enemy had assumed they were facing a dying world. They thought the fight was over. But now the tide was turning, and humanity was claiming the ocean. A low vibration rumbled through the hull, the feel of the ship's thrusters firing up. Dask's gaze shifted, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. "Get me eyes on their command center," he ordered. The display shifted, zooming in on the center of the Zyphar formation. There it was, a massive flagship, a fortress in the void. Its size was staggering, dwarfed by the smaller ships that flanked it. But that's where the key to everything lay, their command vessel. It was the heart of the entire fleet, and it was still operational. A failure to strike at the heart would mean more of the same. Their victory would be fleeting, just a flash of light in the dark. Vexlar stepped forward, a faint grin tugging at the corners of his lips. "We've seen their weaknesses, Commander. They're not invincible." Dask didn't smile back. His eyes never left the screen. "They think they've won. They think their commanders are untouchable. We need to cut off their head. Take out the flagship." Dr. Trevin, who had been quietly working on recalibrating their EMP technology, looked up from his terminal. His usually impassive face now bore an edge of urgency. "Rovan, we've played with their engines, but we haven't touched their weapons. They're still capable of firing back." "I know, Silas," Dask replied, his voice low. He turned, meeting Trevin's gaze. "But we've learned something important. They're vulnerable. They've been operating under the assumption that they're untouchable. Now they're blind. We'll keep them guessing. Distract them long enough to make a final push." "Final push?" Trevin echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Rovan, this isn't a game of chess. You're asking us to walk into the jaws of their fleet." "Exactly," Dask said, his tone firm. "And when we walk in, we'll rip those jaws apart." Vexlar exhaled a breath through his nose, a mix of frustration and understanding in the gesture. "It's not as simple as you're making it sound, Commander. Their backup fleet is closing in. If we don't keep them distracted—" "We'll distract them," Dask interrupted. "That's what we're good at." "Dorian's right, though," Trevin added, his voice a touch more serious. "They might be off balance, but you're underestimating their ability to regroup. They'll hit back hard if we don't neutralize them completely." "We don't have time for half measures," Dask said, his words clipped, decisive. "Once that flagship is neutralized, their entire fleet will crumble." The plan was set in motion. Mace, Trevin, and Vexlar moved swiftly, each preparing their team for what would be their most dangerous mission yet. The atmosphere in the command room shifted from tense to downright suffocating, the weight of the next move hanging heavy on their shoulders. As Dask made his way to the bridge, his boots clanging against the metal floor, the silence was punctuated only by the occasional hiss of pressure systems adjusting. His mind raced, playing out every scenario, every possibility. He had no intention of failing. Failure wasn't an option. He reached the command center where the laser plasma displays blinked with data. The view outside the viewport was now marred by the black silhouettes of the enemy ships. They were out there, like vultures waiting for a sign of weakness. "Ready the boarding teams," Dask ordered, his voice unwavering. "We'll board their flagship. Major Mace, you'll lead the charge. Take control of the ship, disable their weapons systems, and make sure we leave nothing behind." Mace nodded, his jaw set in a determined line. "Understood, Commander. We'll be in and out before they even know what hit them." Dask's gaze shifted to Trevin, who was still reviewing the schematics of the alien ship. "You're sure we can disable their systems?" "It won't be easy," Trevin muttered. "Their technology is advanced, but I've hacked into their network. I can create a backdoor, but it will only give us a window of time, a few minutes at most." "A few minutes is all we need," Dask said, his voice resolute. "Once their weapons are offline, we board, capture, and turn their flagship into a tomb. The rest of their fleet will fall apart without it." The team moved with practiced precision. Each member had a role, and they executed it with deadly efficiency. The atmosphere on the bridge had shifted from tense to electric. Every second counted. The Zyphar were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Mace's team suited up for the boarding operation, preparing their weapons and checking their gear. The weight of their armor felt like nothing compared to the gravity of the task ahead. They were about to board the enemy's most powerful ship, their final fortress. But humanity had already proven they could turn the tides of war with nothing but ingenuity. As the last of the boarding teams prepared to depart, Dask gave one final order. "Do not fail. Do not underestimate them. And do not forget, we are not fighting to survive. We are fighting to conquer." The ship lurched as the command center's doors sealed behind them. It was time. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity's counterattack, and when they saw the wreckage left in the wake of this mission, they'd know Earth had risen from the ashes. As the ship's hull surged forward, Dask's mind was sharp, and his thoughts were clear. This wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of humanity's ascension, and the Zyphar would never see it coming. The first explosion of gunfire echoed through the empty corridors of the Zyphar flagship, the sound like a crack of thunder. The force of the blast reverberated in Dask's bones, but he didn't flinch. His focus was absolute as he led the team deeper into the heart of the alien vessel. The once majestic warship, now crippled by humanity's EMP strike, had turned into a lifeless carcass, its glowing lights now sputtering, flickering intermittently like the final sparks of a dying fire. "Commander, the security systems are offline," Major Mace reported, his voice calm but edged with the weight of urgency. "We're in the clear for now, but we won't have much time." Dask's eyes narrowed as they moved forward, boots clicking on the cold metallic floor. The scent of burning circuits mixed with the sterile, oppressive air inside the ship, an atmosphere too silent for comfort. The walls around them felt like they were closing in, the alien architecture alien to everything humanity had ever designed. The curvature of the walls, the smooth, organic-like textures, and the unnatural light gave the place an eerie, otherworldly feel. "We make it count," Dask murmured under his breath, his fingers brushing lightly against the walls, as if to reassure himself that they were truly here, in the heart of the enemy's power. As they moved deeper into the ship, the laser plasma displays on Dask's wrist flickered, mapping out the route to the command center. The dark corridors twisted and turned, but they had a clear goal now, the heart of the Zyphar command structure. There was no turning back now. Their chances of success rested on one decisive strike. "We're nearly there," Dask said, his voice like steel. "Prepare for contact." The doors ahead of them hissed open, revealing a control room full of alien personnel. The Zyphar soldiers, though disoriented by the EMP blast, were still formidable. Their long limbs moved with fluidity, their advanced weapons pointed toward the intruders with practiced ease. The tension in the room was palpable, and the air felt charged, thick with the smell of electricity and the anticipation of violence. Without a word, Major Mace led the charge, his team of elite Marines flooding into the room with deadly precision. The blinding flashes of gunfire erupted as the two sides clashed. The sound was sharp, jarring, the staccato of human and alien weaponry blending in a deadly symphony. Mace's voice cracked over the comms, cool and steady. "We've got them surrounded, Commander. They're resisting, but not for long." Dask's eyes scanned the room. His hand clenched around his weapon, but he knew better than to rush into the fray. His mind was focused, calculating, watching every move, waiting for an opening. The Zephyr were tough, but they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating humanity's adaptability. "Disarm them," Dask barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need prisoners, not corpses." Mace nodded sharply, his men sweeping through the room, disabling the Zephyr soldiers with cold efficiency. Dask's gaze locked onto one of the aliens, their leader, by the looks of it. He stood at the far end of the room, a tall figure cloaked in black armor, his alien features half obscured by the shadows. His eyes glinted with a dangerous mixture of defiance and confusion, the only sign that he realized how badly the tables had turned. "Commander!" Mace called out from across the room, his voice a mix of satisfaction and curiosity. "You might want to see this." Dask approached the prisoner with cautious steps, his boots echoing on the floor. The alien leader's eyes remained locked on him, unblinking. There was a tension in the air, a stillness that hung like a storm waiting to break. "What do you know?" Dask asked bluntly, his voice sharp and demanding, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the alien. His hand hovered over the control panel that could end the Zephyr's reign over this fleet, but he wanted answers first. He needed leverage. The alien hesitated, the tension stretching like the moment before a knife finds its mark. Then, with a low growl that was barely audible, the leader spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "You think you've won, human?" He spat, his words laced with contempt. "You are nothing but an insect crawling through our galaxy. You can destroy our ships, you can cripple our forces, but you will never have the strength to topple us. You are weak." Dask took a step closer, his expression unchanged. "Strength?" he repeated, his voice low and controlled. "You think strength is what it takes to win? You've underestimated something far more powerful than brute force, something you'll never understand." The alien scoffed, clearly not expecting such a response. "Then tell me, human, what is it that you have? What will you do now that your victory is nothing but a fleeting illusion?" Dask's lips curled into a slight, dangerous smile. "We're not just fighting to survive, Zephyr. We're fighting to own the future, and we'll make sure the rest of the galaxy knows what happens when you push us to the edge." For a brief moment, the alien leader's expression flickered, just a slight twitch of uncertainty. He had always assumed that the Zephyr's dominance would continue unabated, that humanity would be little more than a footnote in the galaxy's history. But now, here they were, breaking through the Zephyr's walls with calculated efficiency, dismantling their fleets with every move. "Your people will learn the hard way," Dask said, his voice steady, eyes still locked on the alien leader. "Humanity doesn't back down, and we've only just begun." Before the alien could respond, Dask turned away, signaling Mace to take the prisoner into custody. "We've got what we need. Get to the communications room. It's time for the galaxy to hear our message." The team moved with practiced precision, the prisoner now bound and contained. The communication room was their next target, and Dask wasn't about to leave anything to chance. They had struck the Zephyr's fleets, crippled their leadership, and now it was time to send a message to the galaxy. The tides were shifting, and every enemy empire needed to know what had just happened. Humanity was no longer a cornered species, fighting to survive. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. As the team moved through the vessel, the atmosphere shifted. The weight of their actions began to settle in, and Dask felt the gravity of the situation pull tighter. He could hear the whispers of his own thoughts, the unsettling awareness that what they were about to do would ripple through the galaxy. They were no longer just survivors. They were players in a game that had just been rewritten. The silence in the halls of the Zyphar flagship was broken only by the steady rhythm of their steps. But in Dask's mind, the storm was brewing. The Zyphar might have thought they were in control, but now, with the first blow struck, the true war had begun. And humanity? Humanity was ready to take what was theirs. As Dask's hand hovered over the console in the communication room, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He turned to his team, his voice steady but full of purpose. Prepare for the next phase. This is just the beginning. And with a final press of the button, the message would echo through the stars. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity's rise, but it would be. The weight of the silence that followed their victory was suffocating, as if the very ship itself had drawn in a breath and was holding it. Dask stood before the massive laser plasma display, his eyes scanning the galaxy, once a place of infinite possibilities, now a theater of war. Humanity had struck its first blow, but the fight was far from over. The Zyphar were battered but not defeated. Their response would be swift and decisive, their arrogance blinding them to the true nature of the force they now faced. The cold, sterile air of the Zyphar flagship filled Dask's lungs with each breath, the remnants of the EMP blast still lingering in the system's electrical pulse. His boots clicked on the metallic floor as he turned to face Mace, whose grim expression mirrored his own. "They'll regroup," Dask muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They'll pull their last reserve forces together, and then they'll come at us harder." Mace gave a short nod. "They always do." His voice was sharp, but there was something unspoken in it, a recognition of the inevitable. He shifted, his fingers moving over the heads-up displays with expert precision, the green light casting shadows across his face. "But this time, we've got the advantage. They've underestimated us." Dask didn't reply. He knew what Mace was saying, but the burden of leadership pressed down on him. The Zyphar had destroyed cities, wiped out entire populations, and yet humanity was still here, not just fighting for survival, but beginning to turn the tide. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, had never witnessed a species as determined as humankind. "Sir," Trevin spoke up from the back, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We've pinpointed their next move. The Zyphar will likely regroup around their new command hub, the one hidden in the Thales system. They're consolidating forces there. If we strike now, we can hit them where it hurts." Dask's eyes flickered to the display, which blinked with new coordinates. Thales, an isolated system on the fringes of known space. It was the perfect place for the Zyphar to hide their true strength. The thought of them consolidating their fleets there, out of sight, made Dask's pulse quicken with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The Zyphar might believe themselves safe, but they didn't know humanity. They didn't know the lengths they would go to, the depth of their resolve. "We can't waste time," Dask said, his voice low and steady, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "We need to cut their command structure off at the head. Mace, prep your team. We're going in full force." The doors to the briefing room hissed open, and Admiral Vexlar strode in, his presence commanding despite the weariness etched into his features. He had seen the devastation, felt the weight of what was at stake. His eyes, though hardened, still flickered with the fire of a warrior who knew that survival alone wasn't enough. "I've ordered our fleet into position," Vexlar said, his deep voice carrying the weight of leadership. "We have one chance. We'll catch them off guard while their forces are still scattered." "Good," Dask replied, his gaze flicking over the tactical display. "We'll strike the moment they think they're safe." The ship lurched forward as the engines powered to life, sending a low vibration through the hull. Dask's fingers clenched into fists at his sides as the familiar hum of battle readiness spread through the ship's crew. The adrenaline of the moment surged through him, every fiber of his being alert, every instinct telling him that the final battle was approaching. The Zyphar had learned humanity's resilience the hard way, but this time they would learn something more: how far humans would go when they had nothing left to lose. Once we breach the Thales system, Dask said, his voice cutting through the tension, we don't give them time to react. The flagship must fall. We take command. No survivors. Mace's jaw tightened as he prepared his team for the boarding assault. The sound of boots hitting the floor echoed in the hall as soldiers moved into position, their faces set with determination. This was no longer just about survival. It was about establishing dominance. "Let's make it happen, Commander," Mace replied, his voice a low growl. The Marines moved like a pack, their mission clear. As the fleet slipped through the void, the weight of their pursuit hanging over them like a shadow, Dask found his mind turning inward. His thoughts wandered briefly to Earth, to the broken remnants of a once thriving world now lying in ruin. The humans who had survived the bombardments, those who had fought to stay alive, were now the vanguard of something much larger. Humanity's rise wasn't just a response to Zyphar aggression. It was the birth of a new era. The Thales system appeared on the display, a smudge of light in the distance. The flagship was there, a glowing behemoth floating in space, humanity's next target. "Prepare for combat," Dask ordered, his voice a cold blade. "This is it." The fleet converged on the Zyphar command hub, their trajectory calculated with brutal efficiency. The flagship loomed ahead, its massive form dominating the space around it, surrounded by smaller ships that looked insignificant in comparison. The Zyphar would never know what hit them. As the ships closed in, Dask's breath quickened. He could feel the anticipation of the crew, the tension in the air as they approached the heart of the enemy's power. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the culmination of every battle, every sacrifice. He could hear the muffled sounds of the crew preparing, the final checks, the calculated movements, and then the silence, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Boarding teams, move out!" Mace's voice crackled through the comms. The doors opened and the Marines flooded the passageways, moving swiftly and silently as the ship entered the final stage of the operation. Their weapons were ready, their minds focused. There was no room for hesitation now. Dask stayed at the helm, his hands steady on the controls, his mind sharp. He watched the heads-up display with unwavering focus as the Zyphar fleet began to react, scrambling to defend their flagship. It was too late. The humans had already struck. The air inside the ship felt thick with tension, as if every moment was stretching longer than it should. But then came the first explosion, a violent burst of sound and light as the Marines breached the Zyphar's defenses. The battle was chaotic, a blur of movement, of fire and explosions, as the Marines cut through the Zyphar's last line of defense. The Zyphar were powerful, but they were now overwhelmed. In the chaos of the fight, Dask's mind remained calm, calculating each move, each moment. He didn't need to give orders. The crew knew what they had to do. The flagship would fall. The seconds dragged on, the weight of the moment pressing down on Dask's shoulders. But with every passing minute, the walls of the Zyphar Empire began to crack. They had thought they could crush humanity beneath their boots. They were wrong. As the final wave of explosions echoed through the corridors, Dask's eyes flickered to the display again. The flagship was theirs. The war was not over, but humanity had struck a decisive blow. The galaxy would soon know what it meant to challenge Earth. Dask's voice was steady, but the satisfaction in it was undeniable. "We've taken the first step. Now let's make sure the galaxy knows what happens when you fight us." And as the last of the Zyphar forces fell, Dask knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had fought back, but their rise was just starting. The galaxy wasn't ready, but it would be. The quiet was almost suffocating in the aftermath of their victory. The Zyphar flagship, once a symbol of their strength, now drifted in space, its massive frame listing like a dying beast. Inside, the chaos had settled into a tense calm as Dask stood at the center of the command room, watching as his team secured their prize. Major Mace's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and deliberate. "Commander, we've taken the bridge. The Zyphar resistance is broken. The ship's ours." Dask nodded without taking his eyes off the laser plasma displays, which flickered with streams of data. The flagship was crippled, its systems in disarray. But even in this moment of triumph, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his chest. There was more to the Gyfar than just this victory. The battle they had just won was merely a piece of the larger puzzle. The real test had yet to come. "Good," Dask responded, his voice low but firm. "But we're not done yet. Check the coordinates again. The Thales system wasn't their only stronghold. They've hidden something here, something big. We need to find it." Trevin, standing by the tactical display, adjusted the readings with a few quick gestures. His brow furrowed as he studied the results. "There's a strange anomaly in the system, Commander. A hidden station, deep within the outskirts. It doesn't show up on any standard scans. Whatever it is, it's off the grid." Dask's fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair, his mind racing through the possibilities. "A hidden weapon?" he mused aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "They didn't just think they could wipe us out with brute force. They must have something else in play." Mace's voice returned, terse and urgent. "We've got company, Commander. Their reinforcements are on the way. We don't have much time before they regroup." "Hold them off," Dask ordered, his tone not one of hesitation, but of calculation. "We need to buy time. We'll find that station before they can launch another wave." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. Dask remained at the helm, his mind not on the battle they had just won, but on the larger war at hand. This wasn't just about striking down the Zyfar fleet. The true danger lay in what they had hidden from humanity, the weapon they had designed to crush not just Earth, but everything in their path. "The station's in the sector known as the Elysium Nebula," Trevin said, his voice quieter now, tinged with concern. "The readings are faint, but I can see it now. It's a military complex, something powerful enough to have escaped our detection until now." Vexlar, standing near the bulkhead, finally spoke, his voice rough with experience. "You're not thinking of taking it on directly, are you? This won't be a simple boarding mission. We're talking about something they've hidden from the galaxy. We can't assume it's just another piece of their fleet." Dask turned to him, his gaze steady. "We don't have the luxury of assuming anything. Our victory so far was unexpected. We've shaken them up, but they'll regroup. We find their weapon before they can use it." Vexlar met his gaze, his eyes narrowing. "You're going in blind. We don't know what we're walking into." "That's the point," Dask replied, his voice sharp, but the edge of something colder behind his words. "We'll be prepared for anything." The tension in the room grew, but there was no time for second thoughts. Dask had made up his mind. The galaxy had already seen what humanity was capable of, but they hadn't seen their full potential. Not yet. The command center hummed to life as they prepared to leave the now derelict flagship behind, their course set for the Elysium Nebula. As they moved through the blackness of space, the glowing points of distant stars blurred into nothingness. The very stillness of space seemed unnatural, the silence pressing down like a weight. Dask could feel the gravity of their mission on his shoulders. He had led humanity to this point, but it was only the beginning. "Report!" Dask barked, his eyes scanning the laser plasma displays as they neared the nebula. Trevin's fingers moved quickly over his console, the blue glow casting harsh shadows across his face. "The station is there, Commander, and it's massive. If this is what I think it is, we're looking at a superweapon. We can't risk letting them deploy it." May spoke next, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable weight of a man who had faced death and knew what it cost. "Then let's make sure they don't get the chance. I've seen what they can do to a planet. We don't stop now. We end this." The ship sliced through the nebula's dense dust clouds, the path forward lit only by the intermittent flashes of their forward sensors. The silence around them seemed to stretch and distort, as if even the void itself were holding its breath. Dask felt the air in the command center grow thick, almost suffocating. The weight of their mission pressed down on him as they approached the station. It loomed ahead, massive and foreboding, its surface covered in dark metal and jagged lines that seemed almost organic. There was something unnerving about it, a sense of unfamiliarity that gnawed at the edges of Dask's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this station wasn't just a weapon. It was a tomb, waiting to swallow them whole. "Deploying the boarding teams," Dask said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He turned to Mace, who was already organizing his troops. "We'll get in, disable whatever they got, and neutralize their weapon. No mistakes." The doors to the boarding shuttles opened, and the team filed in, the faint clink of their gear echoing in the narrow space. The countdown began. Dask stood in the doorway, watching as his men prepared for what would likely be their most dangerous mission yet. The cold weight of their armor settled around them, but it was the knowledge that they were walking into the unknown that made the air feel even colder. As the shuttle launched, the dull roar of the engines barely registered in Dask's ears. His focus was on the station ahead, the dark silhouette looming larger as they closed in. It was like a living thing growing nearer, its sheer size overwhelming. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. There was something wrong about it. The Zyphar had built this in secret, and they weren't just hiding a weapon. They were hiding something worse, something that could tip the balance of the entire galaxy. The shuttle's exterior scraped against the surface of the station as it docked, and the door hissed open, revealing a corridor lit by dim, pulsating lights. The team moved forward with deadly silence, their footsteps muffled against the station's strange metallic floors. The air was thick, sterile, and heavy with the scent of something unfamiliar, something that felt wrong. Ahead, the command room was dark, save for the faint glow of red emergency lights. Dask's fingers hovered over his weapon as the team entered the chamber. The silence was thick, pressing against their eardrums. He could feel the presence of the enemy, hidden just out of sight. "It's too quiet," Mace muttered, his voice low. "Where are they?" Dask's heart beat faster, and he knew in that instant their real challenge was just beginning. The station had been a trap all along, a lure to pull them in. They had walked straight into the jaws of the Zyphar's most devastating secret. And now, it was time to see just how far humanity could push back. The station's heartbeat in the silence, a pulsating hum that seemed to permeate the air around them. Dask's boots echoed on the cold metal floor as he surveyed the darkened corridors, his mind running through the plan one final time. The Zyphar had made a grave mistake, and humanity was about to deliver the decisive blow. They had infiltrated the heart of the enemy's operations, but the true challenge lay ahead, inside the depths of the station, where the weapon that could shift the balance of the galaxy was hidden. "Stay sharp," Dask commanded, his voice low, but laced with the weight of what was to come. "We're walking into their nest. No mistakes." Major Mace's face was set, his eyes steely, with the determination of a soldier who had fought through countless battles. He nodded once, his lips barely twitching. "We're ready, Commander." The team moved deeper into the station, their movements precise and practiced, as if the years of training and combat had distilled them into a single, focused entity. The air around them smelled sterile, sharp, too clean, as if it were hiding something beneath the surface. The walls, cold and unforgiving, seemed to close in with every step, a silent reminder of how little room they had to maneuver. This was a trap, but it was one that humanity would turn on its head. Dask's eyes scanned the heads-up displays embedded into his visor, the laser plasma grids illuminating the dark hallways, revealing more of the station's structure. It was sprawling, endless corridors and chambers that twisted around themselves, a labyrinth designed to disorient, to confuse. But they had one advantage: human ingenuity. The Zyphar had made one fatal error. They had underestimated how far humanity would go to win, and now they were walking into the lion's den. "We've located the weapon's core," Trevin's voice came through the comms, calm but underlined with urgency. "It's located in a secure chamber 3 levels down. We'll need to override their security systems to get inside." "Can you do it?" Dask asked, his focus never wavering from the task at hand. Trevin didn't hesitate. "It'll take a few minutes. They've built a failsafe system, but we should be able to breach it." Dask nodded, his mind working through the sequence of events. They needed the weapon disabled, and fast. But there was no room for mistakes. This was the Zyphar's last gamble, their final card, and they had to cut off the head of the snake before it could strike back. "Major, get your team in position," Dask ordered, his voice sharp. "We're going to need cover while Trevin works his magic. If the Zyphar think they can get their hands on the weapon, they'll bring everything they've got." Mace's voice crackled back with grim resolve. Understood. We'll handle any resistance. The team moved into the designated hallway, taking positions behind the metallic pillars that lined the walls. The soft scrape of boots on metal, the flicker of their laser plasma displays, the low pulse of the station's power system, everything felt heightened, as though the station itself were holding its breath. Dask's heart rate was steady, his mind focused. He knew the risks, but he also knew that humanity had something the Zypher didn't. They had nothing left to lose, and they had a plan. Trevin's voice came through again, tinged with tension. I'm in. The system's giving me trouble, but we're getting through. Dask felt a tightness in his chest as the seconds ticked by. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him. The longer they took, the more time the Zypher had to react. They needed to move quickly. Once we get access, Dask said, his voice cool but filled with purpose, we disable the core. No explosions, no fanfare. We take the weapon offline and leave before they can retaliate. Mace's voice came through with a subtle edge of anticipation. And if they don't let us leave? Then we make sure they don't get the chance to stop us, Dask said, his tone sharper now. But we're not planning on failure. The team waited, every second stretching like hours. The tension in the air thickened, the soft thud of distant footsteps signaling that the Zypher were aware of their presence. Dask's eyes darted back to the heads-up display, scanning for movement. Move, Dask ordered, his voice clipped. We've got company. The doors to the next chamber slammed open, revealing a small squad of Zypher soldiers, their alien forms towering and lithe, their weapons pointed at the team. The room erupted into chaos, the sharp crack of gunfire cutting through the stillness. The Zypher were fast, their movements fluid and deadly, but the humans were faster. Mace and his team engaged immediately, their weapons singing with deadly accuracy as they took out the first wave of soldiers. But this wasn't the real threat. Dask's mind was already several steps ahead, calculating. They were stalling for time. The Zypher would send reinforcements, but they had to keep the pressure on. His eyes flicked to Trevin's position on the display. He was still working, his progress inching forward with every passing second. Mace, hold them off. We need a few more minutes, Dask barked. Mace didn't reply, his focus entirely on the battle before him. His team moved with lethal efficiency, pushing the Zypher soldiers back with relentless force. The sound of gunfire filled the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Commander, the system's nearly breached. Trevin's voice came through again, more strained this time. Just a little longer. Dask's fingers clenched around the grip of his weapon as another wave of Zypher soldiers rushed into the room. The fight was becoming more intense. The alien forces pouring in, but the humans held their ground. Dask knew they were getting close. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, but they were holding their own. And then, the wall of tension finally broke. Trevin's voice came through, urgent and triumphant. I've got it! The core's offline, the weapon's disabled. Dask didn't waste a second. Fall back! We're done here! The team moved as one, pulling back from the Zypher soldiers, who were now scrambling to regain control. Mace's team covered their retreat, holding their ground until the last possible moment, forcing the Zypher to fall back as the humans moved toward the extraction point. As Dask and his team made their way back through the station's corridors, his mind raced. The weapon had been disabled, but the fight was far from over. They had struck a blow, but it was only a single battle in a much larger war. Return to the ship, Dask ordered, his voice calm but resolute. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. As they reached the extraction shuttle, Dask looked back at the station one final time, the metallic walls now silent in the aftermath of the battle. The Zypher had lost their weapon, but the war was far from won. The galaxy had been shaken, but the final gambit was yet to be played. The shuttle door closed with a hiss, sealing them in. Dask's fingers hovered over the controls, his eyes narrowing. Humanity had taken the first step, but now the real challenge awaited. The Zypher were still out there, and their arrogance would be their undoing. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were taking control. Prepare for launch, Dask said, his voice steady and filled with certainty. The galaxy's about to see what happens when you push humanity too far. As the shuttle shot out into the void, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. The shuttle's engines rumbled as it cut through the black void, the sound of its thrusters vibrating in Dask's chest. As the station receded into the distance, swallowed by the cold embrace of space, his mind buzzed with the heavy weight of the mission they had just completed. The air in the cabin was still, but it felt thick with something far more dangerous than silence: expectation. "Well, that's one problem solved." Mace's voice broke through the quiet, a slight edge of dry humor threading through his words. He sat across from Dask, hands resting on his knees, eyes scanning the silent expanse outside the viewport. "But it doesn't feel like the end, does it?" "No," Dask replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the distant stars. "It's just the beginning. We've only poked the hornet's nest." Vexlar stood by the rear of the shuttle, his silhouette stiff and commanding. "That may be true, Commander, but it's the first time I've seen the Yifar so uncertain." His tone was steady, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a recognition of the shift that had begun. "We've hurt them, severed their main artery." Dask's lips tightened into a thin line. "They'll regroup. They always do. But this time they won't have the luxury of thinking they're invincible." The silence settled again, thick with the weight of Dask's words. He had always believed in humanity's potential, but now, as they left the broken remains of the Zyfar's weapon behind, something within him shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about claiming what was theirs. The heads-up display blinked as the coordinates for Earth flickered into view, the homeworld that had once been reduced to rubble now standing on the edge of a new era. They had won a battle, but the war was only beginning. "We've made them bleed," Mace continued, his voice now serious, heavy with the understanding of what they had accomplished. "But we're far from done." "No, we're not," Dask agreed, his gaze steady. "But the galaxy needs to understand something important. We didn't fight because we were cornered. We didn't fight because we had no choice. We fought because we had something the Zyfar never could understand." His voice dropped, his tone like steel. "We fought because we never forget what it means to survive. We fought because we have a fire they'll never extinguish." Trevin's voice crackled through the comms, the faintest trace of exhaustion in his words. "Commander, the data we pulled from the station, it's not just their weapon systems. The Zyfar were preparing for something bigger. They've been consolidating more than just military might. The other empires in this galaxy, they've been under their thumb for centuries. We've exposed their vulnerabilities, but there's more at play." Dask's fingers drummed against the edge of his seat, his mind racing. The Zyfar weren't the only ones in the galaxy with ambition. He had always known that. Now, with their hand revealed, humanity had the power to tip the scales. The question wasn't whether they could defeat the Zyfar. It was whether the galaxy was ready to accept the change they were bringing. "You're saying they've been manipulating the galaxy's power dynamics," Dask mused, leaning forward, eyes never leaving the cold expanse ahead. The Zyfar's grip wasn't just military, it was political, and now they're exposed. Mace nodded grimly. "Exactly. But if we expose that, if we show the rest of the galaxy that the Zyfar are no longer untouchable, well, that's where the real game starts. We've only shown them what happens when they come at us with violence. The next step is showing them what happens when we take the lead." The shuttle lurched slightly as it hit a soft grav wave, the onboard lights flickering briefly. Dask didn't flinch. He had lived through far worse. But the flicker of doubt that tugged at him wasn't about the fight ahead. It was about the unseen forces that had been set into motion. The galaxy was a powder keg, and humanity had just lit the match. "We'll need allies," Vexlar said, his voice steady but filled with something more dangerous. "Not just in our own forces, but across the stars. The Zyfar may have their claws in many systems, but they've lost their grip. If we play this right, we'll have the galaxy in the palm of our hands." Dask's eyes flicked to the heads-up display again, this time zooming in on the scattered systems across the galaxy. The faces of the other empires loomed in his mind's eye, their suspicions, their reluctance to stand against the Zyphar. They didn't know yet, but they were about to be offered a choice. He could already see it, unfolding before him. Humanity had been driven to the brink, beaten and broken, but now they had the power to rewrite the galaxy's future. The other empires? They would either kneel before humanity's strength or be swept aside. "They'll resist," Dask said, his voice softer now, tinged with something more dangerous. Anticipation. "But we've done something they can't ignore. We've taken away their belief in superiority. They'll see us for what we are now, a force that doesn't just fight for survival. We fight to lead." The air in the shuttle grew thicker, the reality of the situation settling in. Every move they made now had the potential to shape the galaxy. Humanity's rise was no longer a dream. It was inevitable. Dask stood, his boots scraping against the metal floor as he made his way to the viewport. His fingers brushed against the cold, smooth surface of the shuttle as he gazed out into the endless expanse. The stars, once a distant dream, now felt within reach. His hand was already on the wheel, ready to take control of the future. "Prepare a transmission," Dask ordered, his voice carrying the weight of his decision. "Let's make it clear. The Zyphar underestimated humanity once. They won't get a second chance." The quiet intensity in his voice filled the room, and for the first time, the full extent of what humanity had just achieved settled into every mind around him. They were no longer a planet of broken survivors. They were something far more dangerous, a unified force with the will to dominate. The galaxy had been warned. Humanity was no longer content with being a footnote in history. They were here to write the chapters. As the shuttle's systems hummed to life, Dask turned to face his crew. "We've given them a glimpse of what we can do. Now we show them what happens when humanity rises. We don't just fight to survive, we fight to dominate." The transmission crackled to life, and Dask's voice filled the empty void of space, reaching out to every corner of the galaxy. "This is Commander Rovan Dask of Earth. To all those who thought humanity was weak, thought we would break under the weight of the universe's cruelty, I have one message for you. You are about to see what happens when you push us too far. You've underestimated us, but we're done surviving. Now, we're taking control." The shuttle shot forward into the void, and Dask stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the future. Humanity was no longer just fighting to exist. They were fighting to conquer, and nothing, not even the galaxy itself, would be able to stop them.